Conflict Transformation Summit to explore pathways towards regenerative cultures in a divided world. My name is Nuno da Silva, and I'm here today with a very special person and very dear to be my dear friend, big brother, Manish Jain. Welcome, Manish.
Hi, Nuno. Good to see you.
Welcome.
Namaste to everyone.
Manish, you're talking to us from Udaipur.
Yes, I'm in Udaipur, yes.
Yeah, you've been deeply committed to regenerating our diverse knowledge systems and cultural imaginations. You were a co-founder and you've been coordinator for the past 17 years of Shikshantar, the People's Institute for Rethinking Education and Development, based there in Udaipur. You're also co-founder of Swaraj University, Creativada, Learning Societies and Conference, Walkouts, Walk-On Network, and Udaipur as a learning city. You've been featured speaker and advisor, and you're a member of the Economics of Happiness Network for localization, and you've recently also helped launch the Ecoversities Network. You've been editing several books on Vimukta Shiksha, liberating learning, on themes such as learning societies and learning, gift culture, community media, and tools for deep dialogue. Prior to this, you had a couple of other lives. You were you're a principal team member of UNESCO Learning Without Frontiers Global Initiative. You've been also a consultant for UNICEF, the World Bank, USAID in Africa, Southeast Asia, and former Soviet Union. You also worked once as an investment banker in Morgan Stanley, and you actually have been trying to unlearn your master's degree in education from Harvard University and BA in economics and international development and political philosophy from Brown University. You, your wife, and your daughter have been unschooling yourselves, and you're passionate about many things, among them urban organic farming, filmmaking, simulation gaming, bicycling, group facilitation, and slow food cooking. And this is just a glimpse of your very wild journey. So I would love to hear a bit more and have our listeners listen a bit more to this journey and what led you to explore some of the topics we've been exploring today, mainly gift culture, exploring what could be for us reclaiming gift cultures, which apparently from your own journey have been with us since immemorial times. So tell us a bit more, what have been happening to you to lead you to this path, in this path?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, Nuno. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Couple of things I think I'd share in my journey. One was when I was a kid. So I grew up in the United States. I was actually, kidnapped when I was 2.5 years old and brought to the U.S. I was kidnapped by the American dream. And so my parents came here in pursuit of that, and I went along for the ride. And when I was growing up in school in the U.S., a few different things started to become very challenging for me and started me to question the education system. So one was this idea of competition, which was like inbuilt in child. And like, I actually made the mistake to, there are a lot of competitions all the time in my school for, spelling bee and writing and this and that. And I made the mistake a couple of times of winning those competitions. And what I felt then was like, what is this kind of situation where when you win something, you're disconnected from your friends, from your community? I looked around, saw the faces, my other friends, they were like very disappointed and very disconnected. And so I made it a point for a lot of these competitions, either to ignore them or if I was forced to enter it, to lose on purpose, because I felt the need to be in that connection and solidarity with many people. And another thing that happened to me was, I wasn't, I never felt very engaged in school. So I was kind of a little bit of a troublemaker. clowning around, making jokes all the time. And so I'd be sent from, there was a kind of system of tracking of students, so like the gifted, talented, and the average, and then the poor, slow students and problem children and all that. So I'd be in the gifted honors group and then make some trouble and be sent to the problem slow people. And I started questioning. I first thought, this is a punishment. And then I realized there were so many talents and so many gifts in these people. And this system was actually labeling so many innocent children and trying to, this fullness of our human beingness and our experience getting caught into labels, and then people getting stuck in those labels, or so many kids I've interacted with who had this label of failure put onto them. Mm. And their whole life vision, sense of worth, self-worth, everything is through that failure. And on the other side, very paradoxically, the people who are labeled as brilliant or, gifted, there's a whole other set of anxieties and insecurities and things because of just the labels that were put on us, and so many people learn, as soon as, like, for example, people hear Harvard, there's a whole set of assumptions and labels that come with that. And so even as a kid, I started questioning, this whole system of labeling and sorting that's been created, and where we're not able to truly see the gifts, or people who are, saying they do a degree in a certain area. So they say, oh, I'm an economist, or I'm this, and they put a label on themselves, and then their whole set of relationships, the way they interact with people, they are limiting themselves. The label starts limiting them. So this richness of what it means to be human and what all of the different things that we can be and we have within us, somehow the system, I started feeling, was really kind of limiting that for a lot of people, And the other thing is, I would say that what really influenced me was when I was I was on Wall Street. I worked on Wall Street for 2 years, an investment banker. And, at that time, this label of, or this mantra, I should say, greed is good, was in high fashion, and saying that the way individual greed should be supported and nurtured in each person, and that'll bring out the best in each person. So when I was there, I started questioning that, and I started looking at the kind of, these questions of, like, people who I thought were interacting were really genuine, good people. Why do they go and do, stupid things like to cheat others or to manipulate or to, like, extract and exploit wealth, like, what is that? And I started understanding that there's a whole system, and deeper than a system, a whole set of cultural attitudes and beliefs, like this idea of greed is good, or competition brings out the best in a person, or so many things we grew up with. And I started actually seeing that economic system was very much, people would act one way with their family and another way when they're in the business world, because of certain kind of norms that were dictated by the money system and the ideas of GNP and growth and all of that. And the more I looked at it, I saw that the system is actually, it gives a sense, oh, you work hard and you'll succeed in that. But I started feeling that the system was really rigged. It's rigged against people in the communities, and it's a kind of, casino gambling, but the odds are all stacked in a certain favor, and everybody's playing this game. And I started questioning, how do we get out of it? And the other thing that happened to me on a very personal level was, I had a little, I would say, I joke, it was a Buddha enlightenment, a little mini enlightenment when I was 23 years old. I was, given everything at that age. New York, I was in New York, fancy, cars and Armani suits and, big parties and supermodels and 5-star hotels and everything, restaurants. I had all of that as a 23-year-old, and I went through that, played that game for about a year, and at some point it just hit me. I woke up one day, I was like, this is it. This isn't really giving me real happiness. This isn't giving me a sense of fulfillment. And I looked at people who are like, had been doing this for 20, 30 years, the managing directors. And I'm like, these guys, they have so much wealth, and all this stuff and all this status, but they don't look very happy and content inside. And they're actually not, many of them I felt were not even really nice people, like nothing I emulated, I didn't see role models in that. So that gave me a lot of courage to walk out of that things in search of like, what are the things that really can bring justice and happiness and sustainability and things to the planet and things. So I came, one other thing I just want to add is I had a parallel life with a love affair with Gandhi and with Jainism growing up. There was a lot of racism when I grew up. I experienced many racist episodes, and somehow my courage came a lot from Gandhi and while growing up. This questions also, Gandhi talks about this idea of Swaraj, which is literally translated as self-rule or self-mastery, but I like to think about it as harmony of the self. So there's our personal self, our collective self, our spiritual self, our nature self, and how do we build a world that creates harmony amongst these? And so that question, that was a question that Gandhi had offered to the freedom struggle, really. And in that questioning kind of modern development, modern civilization, ideas of progress, a lot of those things came up in some of Gandhi's writing. A lot of people don't know this about Gandhi. They just associate with him with nonviolence. But there was a much larger set of questions and container he was trying to ask around that.
Yeah, just to name, Manish, that I've studied economics, and it took me like 10 years after finishing the graduation to get in contact with other economical ideas, because it's pretty much Chicago school that they teach everywhere around the world. And so that's in that journey, after discovering Schumacher, then I discovered some of the economists that work with Gandhi and the amazing ideas they had, the totally other way of
thinking. Yeah. So I also had a similar journey. Like after I left Wall Street, for many years, I was just like, I was maybe traumatized because I had been so indoctrinated into a certain belief around economics. And I was like, this totally sucks. This doesn't work, and this is like screwing it, what to do. And so then I started a search to actually also try to find other ways. And that's how I stumbled on gift culture. And then I realized that this was part of my everyday upbringing in a very private kind of life. And my connection, for example, with Jainism, I started seeing there was, and then I looked at many other spiritual traditions also, but within all of those, there was a strong element of gift culture, but it somehow kind of got pushed to the side, a little bit. And people weren't seeing it as a larger operating system for how economy has to be, put into the right frame, like otherwise if you leave economy on its own, it can run out of wild. So there has to be a larger worldview, a larger set of values that become the norm to guide economy. So that was where I started finding it, and I can share some more examples of what I discovered and rediscovered in Jainism, but one is, there's this idea of anekantvad, which is helped me a lot because I spent a lot of my youth also, and I still am a very strong activist. And so activist and ideology have shaped us in many different ways, right? And so there is a certain set of beliefs and experiences, and yet Anekantvad is about saying that there's a multiplicity, trying to see the multiplicity of truths and experiences, and not get caught into an ideology. I think again is a thing of modern academia and civilization, to say you have to take a position and you're not allowed to veer from it. And I think what Anekantvad centers is a search for truth, rather than thinking that there's a very beautiful quote by Václav Havel, that I prefer to take the company of those seeking the truth rather than those who think they found it. And so how do we keep that canvas up? And so that's helped me, because at one point I can say I was like very, after my Wall Street experiences, very anti-corporate, and
it's part of this process. I experienced that also in some of the big changes in my life. It's like a process of kind of, you need to make a clear distinction or border. This is not this is not me anymore. I don't want to be any part with this. So you get very strict on the beginning of that dissociation.
Yes, and then how to see in that there are, again, not fall into the labels I was talking. Those that become labels also, that are very convenient to sell a very simplistic story, maybe an oversimplistic story about who people are or what they are. There's one of my, very close friends. He's now, it's very strange and it's scary maybe. He's managing director at Goldman Sachs. And the paradox which he left me with as a gift, I think, is that he is one of the kindest, sweetest, gentlest, most caring family people I've ever met in my life. And yet he's head of probably the worst investment bank, one of the heads of that in the world, So it's something that I've heard, with him particularly, it's interesting. I didn't speak to him. We had a fight when I walked out of this. And for 15 years, we didn't speak.
Wow.
Because of this ideological positioning of things. And then finally, a friend connected us and said, oh, this friend is missing you. We were talking about you the other day. It'd be great. And so something had shifted in me to saying that, okay, and reminded me that he's a human being. And all of the beautiful traits about him. And so we restarted our friendship. And like when we met, it was like we had never, I'm sure you've had a situation, like we had never been apart, but something, so I think that is one thing that I've taken from Jainism. And the other thing is there's an idea of Aparigraha, which means non-ownership or non-attachment. And the idea, I started thinking about all of these things that we are, modern society again indoctrinates us. We are owners of everything. We think, oh, I own this land, I own this knowledge, it's copyrighted by me, I own this. Even times people, I own my partner, I own, like that shows up in so many ways. And if we actually step back and think, we're not owners of anything, and Gandhi had a nice word, trusteeship, yes. So we have a sense of care and responsibility, but we're not the owners of those. Those are temporary. We've been given some responsibility, some duty to take care of things, but not to get out of this. And so many things. It was interesting in India. I was really shocked because in my Harvard experience, the biggest thing in academia is plagiarism. Like, you own this, this is copyrighted, and this is, if you repeat this without proper citations and all of that, you're plagiarizing from somebody. And when I came back to India, I became quite immersed and involved with traditional knowledge and with the oral traditions. And the oral tradition has an entirely different code around, it's very much centered in the gift culture, like you can take anybody's story, you can take anything, you can modify it if you want, you can share it to them, you can put your own thing into it. And you don't have to say, oh, so-and-so said this. I mean, you can do it for your effect of the story, or you can take this. And this is how the whole oral, it's totally opposite to these things of ownership. And the same thing with traditional knowledge. So much of it has grown out of a container of, of a sharing culture, not out of a sense of ownership. So all of these, this started, and a lot of it for me, I said I left, eventually I left the UN and all that, and I came back to what I called my grandmother's university. So my attempt to kind of see something beyond the worldview that, capitalism and modernity and all of this had kind of forced on me, to actually understand more deeply what are the other ways that people relate to each other, relate to the world. One of my favorite, sayings is that, it's a Native American saying actually, which my grandmother had said it in many different kinds of ways. But it's like, what you people call your natural resources, we call our relatives. So relationality being a core of how life is centered versus individualism, or what does it mean, so part of this question of Swaraj is, how does it mean to retain my own sense of autonomy and individuality, but also be in a relationship with lots of different people? So that's been a question that's been with me and for a long time. And my grandmother helped me start to unlearn many of those notions and see them more clearly. Like how do we build a healthy sense of real community, and that's based on a sense of deep connection, oneness with life. So it's been a bit
really,
of the.
It's really striking that only when we kind of turn away from being deeply immersed in a society that is so based on separation, and start to get engaged in these more traditional ways or other ways of being, which actually acknowledge in all the living dimensions this interdependency, that everything is deeply connected, that we kind of discover how we were normalized in certain behaviors and ways of thinking that are totally disconnecting, like disconnecting us from ourselves and from life. And it's really striking because
totally
it's such a normal, it's dysfunctional, but when we are in it, it's like normal, right? It's our normality, so we don't realize it's insane.
And we don't, in our center here in Shikshantar, it's interesting when we've had this happen over and over again. It's interesting, like this small little, it becomes very clear, these small intercultural interactions. So we've seen interesting, several students, foreign students, American students, they've come into our center. Somebody's carrying some snacks, or some fruits, or like in most places in healthy societies, you would offer to the whatever you're eating, you would really offer it to somebody and say, have some, let's share something together. But so many of the young Indians who are in touch with it, they come to me and they're saying, what's wrong with these people? It's just common sense, hospitality, care to offer what you are doing as a way to connect. And so many times they've seen people come and they're just eating themselves and they never offer, or they go in the corner and they hide their food and they're eating alone or something. So, it's a kind of, you notice it more once you step out of the bubble, this kind of dysfunctionality,
or like a psychosis or
people, or people, running and eating with their food, it's like this whole culture, fast food, takeout culture, people just eating and they're like, this is crazy. Why wouldn't you sit down properly? It's disrespectful to your food even, and to the people who've grown and prepared the food, that you're just gulping it and running around and not actually taking time to give thanks and to connect with the food and all of that. So these little things, being with my grandmother, I started noticing all of these, how these, these conditionings had been, I'd grown up with and normalized those in a sense. So, but just going back, I think this thing of ownership has really been, because I don't know if the people know much about Jainism, but Jainism is a spiritual philosophical tradition that started, some people say around 2,500 years ago. And the inquiry around that has been, how do we live a life of nonviolence, of deep connection, of love, of care, and what does that mean to live that life individually, and how do we create structures which can support that lifestyle? So these inquiries around, that seeing that violence, when you take a position, if you take a strong position, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't, but without being able to see and listen to stories and positions, where they come from in other people, the truth they're holding, you're going to have violence if you're not able to create a space for this. And also this idea of ownership. If you start to think this is mine and not yours and things, it's going to generate more and more violence. And
because it generates scarcity, right? So then
yes,
you have few with much of the land and much of the resources, and then a lot with what's supposed to be the commons. I mean, it's part of the wealth of life.
Exactly. So we've accepted it, and it's crazy, I know you're involved also in international development. So we see things like, sustainable development goals, which all look very beautiful. But one of the core things in that is called PPP, public-private partnerships, which is basically an attempt to take things from the commons and privatize them more into, these kinds of hands. And so even the things we think are, good solutions and trying to help are built on this kind of values and sense of scarcity and control that manifests in all kinds of ways. So there's a need to, I think, look more deeply at what gift culture has given me as a sense to look more deeply at many different cultural assumptions that we're holding. And to say that how do we step out of those, because unless we start to rethink some of those, we will keep generating this kind of violence all the time on each other.
Yeah, I was exactly thinking that. It's like growing up in a worldview of separation and scarcity, which is mainly based also some of the economic thinking of our times, makes us then create all these fields of knowledge and then structures in society that actually are reflex of that way of thinking, that then get us caught in all sorts of violence and conflicts. And I think we've talked a bit as a preparation in relation with money, which I think is maybe a good place to explore, because I mean, I'm an economist. I know a bit of the architecture of it, but maybe you can talk a bit about that, because obviously that's definitely a system that is getting us caught in playing a game, a rigged game somehow.
Yeah, definitely. So so I think there's a few things that the money system does, right? It sets up a sense of transaction. A relationship becomes transaction, and the transaction, it's even before the money. I would say the barter system is actually the extension becomes the money system, and that barter system and the money system is based, as you were saying, on separateness, that you and I are different. And so then my goal in a transaction is to extract the maximum I can from you and give the minimum. Right? So that's the whole mindset that drives that. And the flip side of that would be, so what that does is set up a kind of zero-sum system where you think that, if you get more, I'll get less. And so I think what the other way in the gift culture, we would say that, more for you is more for me, versus the idea of more for you means less for me. Can we start to envision where more things going to you means actually I will also get more happiness, more joy, more pleasure, more fulfillment and things. And that happens when we feel that deeper sense of connection with life and with people around us. And so I think the money system then, there's the mechanics of it as a system of debt, and people, once we create most of the money is not backed by anything. It's just more and more debt reproducing itself. And that debt is always putting us in more and more scarcity. Uh, and so, and that debt is set up to, help, the people who already have control over money can create more of it very easily. And everybody, where I've seen village communities which were not very dependent on money, which never thought of themselves as very poor, which were much more rich sense of the commons and things being shared and connected. But as soon as money comes in, a sense of otherness gets created, a sense of scarcity gets created within oneself. Even though you may have, a sense of enoughness with your food and with your shelter and with your relationships, the sense as soon as money comes in, you start feeling I'm lacking something and I need more money, and then you get caught into that. And so, I've been over the years, I've seen that, like with things which are again like self-help groups and microfinance groups, for example, a lot of really nice people who wanted to help have brought this whole thinking of the money system into communities which really were not dependent on that or were not driven by that. And I think that, there may be, my own thing is there may be a small place for a tool such as money that is not, based on debt, but a tool of exchange. But the larger, again, the cosmovision, the worldview has to be that is around this idea of how can we will get more if we care for the other. We will feel more satisfaction and more connection and more joy if we care for the other. And so that's the kind of thing that the money system has to be kind of pulled back and resituated. Whatever tools we design for some kind of exchanges that might be with people would have to be reframed within all of this context.
Yeah, I was thinking like one of the things, for instance, that is often kind of really promoted in the dominant worldview is this idea of meritocracy. And there's a lot of issues for me with that, because it's like, okay, you are born with something that you didn't make anything to do, some sort of gift, and you use it instead of using it for the wealth of life and, and in that sense kind of fulfill a meaningful life. We are caught in this mentality of I deserve this, I deserve to have more, and then justify all sorts of things to be taking, which is in a way part of the dominant mentality in places like Wall Street. And I'm thinking like really the system it came into a place where the kind of sociopathologies are valued, in a sense that when you look at the top of the chain, you have sociopaths, like people disconnected from
absolutely
from themselves.
This is the strange schizophrenia in us. If we actually, like you'll never, at least around India, and I think most are, you won't go and see like in people's houses, you won't see, this photos of like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg. No one will have a big photo in their living room of those people. And you'll find, more of the spiritual visionaries, like Buddha, or in Jains, it's Mahavir, or different spirit who have basically given up all of these things. Those are the people we'll put in frames and put in our living rooms, and yet somehow our whole conversation in public is around the sociopathic, value system and things. So it's a very strange schizophrenia that has come into our lives due to modernity. But I would say, one thing I was going to say, it's not also even just on Wall Street that one gets it. One of the things I noticed, a friend had shared with me once, and it became so like shocking, was simple, the way we play, the way we see play. So a game that many of the viewers would have had played, musical chairs. Musical chairs is one of the sickest games of conditioning us into scarcity. There's only one chair. You have to kick and fight and push your friend to get that one chair, and that is totally socially justified. and
That's really funny because
recognized and celebrated, at
it's
every
really
birthday party in
I
every
play
city.
that. Yeah. Then if you start to look with those lenses, and I invite the listeners to do that, think about the quantity of games we grown up into that kind of lean us into this mentality, right? Of
Yeah,
competition and of in such a way that I remember that was a struggle for me when I gave classes in schools a couple of years ago, that how much teachers are caught in that idea of that if you don't do something competitive and that you give prizes, so you kind of do this reward kind of thing,
yeah,
then that's not engaging. It's like there's this kind of belief, deep-seated belief, that if it's not competitive and if you're not going to gain something material, people are not going to engage in the game. It's not going to
yeah,
be pleasurable or
yeah. Well, that's a whole, again, that's a whole different conversation, which is related, I think. But reward and punishment, the whole idea of extrinsic, everything is extrinsically driven. So most of the things we don't even, I would say our nature is not even to do those things. But you create such a severe kind of system of reward and punishment where you're pushing people all the time to do that, and you, mock them or humiliate them if they choose not to do those things, or find ways to punish them if they don't do those things. So the whole idea of a paradigm of like intrinsic motivation, of deeper connection being what drives people, deeper sense of purpose, different, I really believe that at least my own experience is like the deepest happiness is when we share our gifts with each other. I've experienced that so many times. Like by sharing, I feel the most happy when we're in that sense of community and of caring and sharing these gifts with each other. And I feel like those are situations I'm learning the most also, or I'm unlearning the most, is when I'm able to really share those things. I think one thing though, I would want to question, what I learned from the gift culture is a lot of people, have heard me or other friends like Charles Eisenstein or things talk about gift culture. And the quick thing they do is, okay, I'm going to stop using money. I'm going to go total gift culture and things. And so, and then oftentimes they'll come back a month later and said, I don't feel supported. I've been giving so much and I don't feel like, I did a workshop and somebody only put $1 in the box after the workshop. And so I feel disrespected and I feel, all of these feelings come up, and they're like, so your gift culture things don't work really. And so I started thinking on, I think there's again, because gift culture, we're trying to bring it within this kind of a dominant set of structures and systems. There's some steps we have to do before we get to, saying I'm going to come out of the money system and its control over, many aspects, or reward and punishment and its control over so many ways I'm making my decision. There's some steps of building that we need to do beforehand. And
could you tell us a bit about some of them? Because I
yeah.
do know that I realize when I start to make this move, you're talking, and start to try to do things that are accessible and trust that they will generate what I need. That I had deeply seated traumas because of having grown up in a society based on money, So I had also to be able to take care of that, which was really hard because you get this sense of being exploited and all sorts of different feelings coming from that.
Yes. So I think, what I think the first point for me is that, gift culture always starts with kind of a invocation of gratitude. Yeah, sorry for that. Okay, so I learned that the first experiment one needs to get into, or inquiry, is around gratitude and invoking gratitude, celebrating gratitude. So really, there are different kinds of meditations, different kinds of prayers that one can do, and you'll find them in many different cultures. But basically, is to center yourself back into this feeling of and remember all of the things that you have received, the abundance that surrounds you, and the beauty that surrounds you, the gifts that are flowing through you, the privileges that you've been given, all of those things that so that's a very small meditation that shifts us again out of scarcity back into the sense of abundance. Abundance is a feeling. It's not necessarily how many things you have, but it's a feeling of how much of how connected you are, and how much life is there with you and for you. So I think that is whenever I felt like there's a lot of funny stories that I could share where I felt, even though I so deeply believe this, and the old conditioning sometimes takes you over, And so what quickly shifts me out back is just meditating for a few minutes again with gratitude for all of the things that I've received, and even gratitude for things we usually are grateful for, mistakes that I've made, or gratitude for even when I've been very sad or angry. That these are all emotions that one can also be grateful for it. So it's not only the goody things that you can show gratitude for, but all of those things is there. So that is one of the key elements. The second thing I think that I see that one has to really honestly think about your needs. What are my needs? Like what do I need? Because I've seen, it's very strange, like people who in situations I've seen them offering, for example, workshops, and they have really high prices on that. And it's like, do you really need that much money? Why don't you think of gift culture? And like, no, my status needs are there. If I give it free, people won't respect me. They won't. So it's not even a real need of money, but there's a very insidious way that the money system has come into our sense of who we are. So my
self-worth, yeah.
My self-worth, and this is a lot of work that one needs to do on oneself to kind of peel that out and pull that away from that. My self-worth has nothing to do with money, and so I've had to do a lot of inner work on myself also to disconnect that. And even I used to get my mother, for example, she is one of my greatest enemies, and she's one of my greatest supporters also. But she used to poke me, oh, you left all of this jobs, or you're making a lot of money, you're doing nothing. And that used to trigger me so much. But I was able to then do a lot of work on myself to start to separate myself, and saying that, and she's doing it with the intention of trying to motivate me in some way. But, it also was creating a lot of pain and disconnect between us. But as soon as I let go of my sense of self-worth being connected, I was able to laugh at that, and I could see the beauty also of her intention of trying to just offer another way of love. Actually, her conception of love maybe was connected to it. So I think that second is like really being honest of our needs. Sometimes we are in a more vulnerable position, or we need more extra care we feel right now, or we need, like we're feeling insecure about something. So I think to start to be honest with ourselves about that and voice that in when we need that, because it shouldn't be like the situation where somebody's with their boyfriend or girlfriend or partner, and it starts, you should have thought about this. How could you not have done this? You should have, you should have just done it. And why do I have to express that? But I think sometimes in a healthy way, I've also heard the other side, very interesting. Some of my friends from indigenous communities also say that, there's no need to express it sometimes, but one needs to sense it. So the care and sense, if you're really in a relation of care, you'll sense it anyway. So, but since we are in a kind of transition period of trying to come out of a kind of deep indoctrination, at least being honest in ourselves about what we really need. And if we can express that, and also asking the other person, maybe, what do you need? Or I see that you might need this. I'm just checking in on you. Is this a need of yours? And so trying to at least create a much more honest space around that. And I think a lot of times, where people there's also the myth of this valiant hero, and people don't want to express what they really need at that time sometimes. So there's some things around that I think we need to really work on. And
You know,
the
one of
third,
the things, Manish, just sorry, I remember that when I start to work with some friends on doing workshops and learning experiences and actually trying to embody some of these things you're talking about, I remember doing a money pile, which was a very interesting exercise with another colleague where we kind of we organized the workshop. We never talked about money. We just thought like, what is it that each one, in the end of it, almost in the end, we thought like, what is it that we, each one of us need? And obviously we were in different moments of our lives, so we had different needs. And we made this exercise around a proposal of a fair distribution,
Mhm.
taking the needs also in consideration, not only the time we worked and all the different other elements, which generated a very uh, connecting conversation. And what I found that was marvelous with that is that we got different amounts of money in the end, obviously, but I got less. And I remember having these feelings because of being in the dominant system of, well, I should have maybe asked more, or maybe on the long term I'm going to be in a vulnerable situation. But actually, this was a starting point for us of a long journey of deep trust that we know that everything we'll do, if I'm in a need, he's going to take care of me. I don't
Yeah.
need to be
Yes.
stressed. So it's amazing what it can generate. And the other thing you're saying that is it's very hard is this of being able to state what is it that you need
Yeah.
in front of people. And usually when I've done that, people give back even more than you need often.
And oftentimes what we don't necessarily need the money. We might say, I need more care, I need more respect, I need space, I need time, I need these other things which
Yeah.
are also, or I need food. So maybe somebody is growing some food and they're willing to come and share it with you, so there are many different ways that can show up in the world. But that conversation is important because as I said, that insidious kind of infiltration into all bits of our being with the money system and valuing in our work, we need to kind of take steps to bring it out. And the third thing is what I think is what you're saying is a field of trust. So these acts start to, and there's also this sense. There's friends we work with a lot here called Move by Love, and they do a lot of things with random acts of kindness. We've also done a lot of experiments in our city. So it could be things like free hugs, or it could be we set up something on the lake front every week where we invite people to share books that they're super inspired by, that have shifted their lives, and people can take those as gifts, without any attachments or strings or anything with that. But and people are like, wow, somebody left a gift for me. Wow, somebody cares about me. And so you start to, the urban life particularly, and also more than now, even more so the digital life, this sense of like really feeling somebody, you were saying earlier, somebody cares for me. There's this web of care out there that is always there to take care of me. So I don't have to get so stressed that I'm alone all the time and I need a big bank account in case an emergency happens, or I need to buy a lot of insurance. So I think that we've forgotten, and I've seen that in so many communities, the insurance, and that comes from a whole web of relationships and a feeling that, okay, I know if anything happens to me, my family will be taken care of, and so there's a whole, or I'll be taken care of if I need it. That web of relationships is where we, I think, sometimes forget to invest enough time and energy and attention to, and we think that a bank account is going to solve that for us. And so I think, but these acts of kindness and care, simple things. If we start to do that with our friends and with strangers, even, it starts to create a larger field of trust again. Because unfortunately, again, so many things. I remember growing up. Don't talk to strangers. Don't trust your neighbors. Don't trust this. Don't. Everyone's out to cheat you. Everything all the time. We're hammered with these kinds of this propaganda. So we need little acts to start to see. No, another thing we do, for example, is something very powerful. It's a rite of passage we do in our university. Is called the cycle yatra. So going a whole week out and living as a group without any money, and connecting to people and seeing really that this web of the gift culture uh, exists around us all the time. I mean, we've seen it recently with all of the horror stories of migrant labor, people having to leave the villages, leave the cities, and go wanting to go back home. So many people coming out to care and give food and things. So this is it's all around us, and to reconnect to that belief is very important. I think that feeling, is very important. And the thing I would just want to say around this is that there's a goddess of the gift. I like to say this. And the God of the gift is always testing us. Are you a true believer, or are you just saying the words? The challenges, I feel those challenges all the time. Am I really there? And so something will happen, and I'll start myself, as I said, slipping into scarcity. I feel, okay, the goddess is playing with me. And saying, okay, here's another chance to go deeper in this feeling and your faith in it, And I think this is, I would say that for me and many other friends, this has been one of the essences of our spiritual journey. This deep reconnection with all of life and faith that life is there to take care of us is I think is a thing I find it missing in a lot of the spiritual discourses and groups that I see around that. This really reconnecting to gift culture is, I think, one of the essences of a deep spiritual journey.
Oh, Manish, that was amazing. We are getting to an end. One of the things that I wanted to say, and just to check if you want to add something more, is that I have a sense that awakening ourselves to this wealth of a world that is much more alive than we often think, and that we are deeply connected with everything. So when we connect with that, we're actually much more connected with the abundance and the wealth of life. That kind of lead us into a place, and especially if I look at the elements you mentioned of gift culture, of starting with gratitude, of being really conscious of your needs, and creating fields of trust, is stepping into a kind of a great container of relationship to hold any sorts of difficulties we might face, because the topic of the summit is conflicts, and we're often thinking about conflicts. And here for me is really looking a bit at some sort of a natural immunological system on a social level, that if we are moving towards that, there's all sorts of effects happening on a biological level of, a nervous system that starts to be more in balance, all different kind of things that put us in a much better place to live a more healthy, regenerative relationship, even in hard situations, because it's not like this is going to make everything beautiful and neat, and like it's not like a happy audio disc ending. So I don't know if you want to add something as we close.
A couple of these things, just generally on conflict, I feel that, in the gift culture program, we have to start to embrace the idea that conflict is a gift. That it can, and we work on this a lot in Swaraj University, is that how can we start to see conflict as not something to be managed or avoided or transformed, but this is a gift, and it can help us see many different things within us. This conflict, if we start to reflect on it and take some responsibility for it rather than blaming others, which is again how we're trained to do things, that this can be a very deep gift for us to know ourselves better and to deepen our search for the truth, and for our own purpose and things. So this is a long thing we could talk about more, but I just think that this essence is to really take it as a gift. And same thing as I said earlier, things like mistakes, which we're trained again to hide mistakes because we think we'll be punished, and all of these things. That how do we start to create a field where we can see these things as gifts and ask the very simple, what is the gift in this conflict? What is the gift in this? And that can then open up a whole different kind of inquiry than versus blame and or running away from it and all of that. So That's the thing. And I just think the last thing I just wanted to comment, we didn't talk that much about, but I mentioned earlier, but the education system, has really the need to reimagine that. That's actually been one of my main work is that, like I was just thinking, small things like taking feed, when we talk about this in our university, how, just the art of giving and taking feedback. It's such a difficult thing for people because we're trained, no, the marks or the grades we give, that's the feedback we have on whether we're good or we're bad but there's a whole art actually around little things of feedback, like and usually people, when they give feedback, it sounds like very harsh or something, so then it breaks up things. When they take feedback, they take it, oh, this person is against me or criticizing me. So a very small thing just like that, and that becomes really important if we want to move out of a system that is always trying to control and externally evaluate us, externally judge us, whether we're good and bad. And how do we move into something that is much more convivial? So small things like that. And I think the education system, at least the need to really create more kinds of learning spaces and communities which actually can give us a space to practice these things together, and to look at our worldviews and unlearn some of those worldviews. The schooling system seems to be one that is really reproducing a paradigm of fear and control and competition and monoculture. So it seems that we'll always, as long as that's the operating system, we'll be always reacting to that. So really to create a different kind of operating system for our learning and unlearning is, I think, essential going forward. And things one thing I didn't mention, which is very important to me, and also in this field of trust, is spaces for forgiveness, forgiving ourselves and forgiving others. And so we have been, for example, in the Jain tradition, every year a 1 week of period of fasting, intense fasting, and that period is a reflective. Who have I been in? Where are my relations out of harmony? Who have I been in conflict with? Who am I, where is there a lot of friction and things? And where do I feel unsettled? Really reflecting and facing those. Because I think, again, modern systems give us, there's a lot of space for escapism. A lot of things, let's escape this, rather than actually looking at those things and what's behind them. What is it telling me about myself? And how can I, through very simple acts of forgiveness, start to heal so many things that are out there? What's amazing is that our, ancestors, our indigenous traditions, they have left us so many amazing simple tools. We've made it so complicated. We have tools out there. They're not all high tech and everything, but they're very beautiful tools which can actually really help us open up so so many gifts within us and within each other. So I think that's where I'll just end it. And it's been so lovely to be with you. Thank you. I don't know if the viewers know, but Dudo had to keep asking me, so I'm so happy that I came on this summit, and really beautiful to reconnect with you, Nuno.
Thank you so much, Manish. She was lovely and amazing as usual. Thank you for opening up our imaginations of what is possible, and really, do something to unbreak the limiting imagination of schooling and of growing up in this dominant view. Thank you. It was great. Looking forward for next one.
Yes, anytime. Love you.